Okay, what do we have here? Slutwalk is not sexual liberation. This is what iamcurioussblue told me to take a look at. Because he was complaining that Gail Dines was acting like women ought to behave properly. And she has some kind of antiquated notion of what's going on with women and sexuality. Okay, so let's read the article, because when I looked it up and found it, it had nothing to do with what he was saying whatsoever, okay? Slutwalk is not sexual liberation. It says Gail Dines and Wendy J. Murphy. And this is the first thing I've ever seen from Gail. I have yet to look up anything Gail Dines has to say. Okay, the first paragraph is the most poorly written paragraph of the whole article. It says it wasn't long ago that being called slut meant social death. Now, later on, she describes that it still means that. But she's talking about the way women are shoved into two different categories by our society, and that's not fair. So it says it wasn't long ago that being called slut meant social death. No nice boy would take you home to meet his parents, and no good girl would ever be your friend. At the same time, refusing to submit to sex meant you were prude or frigid. In short, there was no right way to be. Things have improved a bit in that young women are more insistent on their right to sexual autonomy, but sexually active women remain vulnerable to harsh social judgments, even as the mass media celebrate and encourage such behavior. And research shows that the label slut still has long-term negative consequences, especially for younger girls. And this is true. If you read and look into this, what the girls go through in school, you know, being bullied to death and called sluts and things like that, it's still alive and well. Come on. Nevertheless, a group of activists organized an event called Slutwalk that took place on Saturday in Boston. It followed on the heels of a similar event in Toronto earlier this month, where women rallied in response to a comment made by a representative of the police that said women should avoid dressing like sluts in order not to be victimized. Give me a break. To be sure, such a comment from law enforcement is highly offensive in suggesting that some victims of rape are responsible for the criminal acts of their attackers. Rather than admonishing women to dress a certain way, police should be warning potential offenders that they should avoid assaulting women in order not to go to prison. Okay, and I'm going to try to scroll down again. The fact that more than 2,000 turned out to the march around Boston Commons suggests that women are indeed hungry for sexual autonomy. But something else was at work here. Many of the banners protested the ubiquity of sexual violence in the lives of women. Signs made by protesters showed that women are angry with being blamed for male violence and are fed up with the failure of the culture to hold men accountable. Clearly, the theme of the Slutwalk has struck a nerve, with similar events being planned around the world, including the one in London in June. The organizers claim that celebrating the word slut, and here's where we get into some controversy, because some say it has to do with the word slut, or they were making some kind of apologetics for using that word, or whatever. And some don't claim it's about that at all. So now we're branching off into stage left, where we're going to talk about the word, okay? The organizers claim that celebrating the word slut and promoting slutishness in general will help women achieve full autonomy over their sexuality. But the focus on reclaiming the word slut fails to address the real issue. And she's going to say something I completely agree with. Completely. The term slut is so deeply rooted in the patriarchal Madonna whore view of women's sexuality that it is beyond redemption. The word is so saturated with the ideology that female sexual energy deserves punishment that trying to change its meaning is a waste of precious feminist resources. Okay. So all she's saying is it reinforces that patriarchal split split, that schizophrenia, that good versus evil, you know, and a female can have good sexuality, or she can have really bad sexuality, and it's ridiculous. So slut can't be reclaimed. But to me, okay, when they explained slut walk, I understood it to be that they were making the statement, look, I can be as slutty as I want to be. I don't care what you want to call it. You can call me anything you want. I can be that, and I'm in charge. You can't have none of this unless I say you can. And that's that, period. And I think when I heard that about slut walk, I was really happy with that message, because that is, you know, that's my interest in the sex industry, was hearing men actually say that it's no big deal to rape prostitutes or people that are in erotic films. As if, I mean, that the notion, what they must view sex as is nonsense. They must view it as some mystical, magical bus ride or something. To say, well, once you do this bad stuff, then you no longer control your body, and it's not going to matter what I do to you, because you're somehow already tarnished. You're already a bad girl. It's that 2-lane highway that is so dangerous for sex workers. But that the people that really, really buy into that 2-lane highway seem to be the ones that gravitate to them. You know, they're definitely the ones that kill them. I'll tell you that much. So this is, it's dangerous for women. It's dangerous for sex workers. The notion of slut. But there's nothing wrong with this march. I mean, in my opinion, like I said. I mean, I just stated why I like it. So Gail here and Wendy are just talking about that term, and they're right about the term. But there's nothing wrong with using it in the march, because the cop used that. It's making that point. It's not making another point. Now, somebody may have said, you know, oh, this is about reclaiming that word. They're wrong. You can debate that, but that's just, it's a side issue of what the march was about. Okay, and so here she says, as teachers who travel around the country speaking about sexual violence, pornography, and feminism, we hear stories from women, students who feel intense pressure to be sexually available on demand. These students have grown up in a culture in which hypersexualized images of young women are commonplace, and where hardcore porn is the major form of sex education for young men. Sorry for the heavy sighs. They have been told over and over that in order to be valued in such a culture, they must look and act like sluts, while not being labeled slut, because the label has dire consequences, including being blamed for rape, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and self-mutilation. And that's true. I've seen this. Like, oh, you're some kind of emo slut that cuts yourself, or something like that. Like, well, that's because you're a slut, or whatever. I mean, the kids are cruel to each other about that. They're still buying into these old-fashioned systems. So even though people are becoming more promiscuous, we're still retaining those ridiculous values. But women, I think, can be just as sexually active as men, and each person has to gauge what they're good for, right? What they can handle, what they can do. But this, you know, there's a double standard with women and men versus men. But then there's this impossible perpetual virginity while being sexual thing that men are putting onto women that are, it's bananas. And this is what Gail Dines is addressing. So women need to find ways to create their own authentic sexuality. That's the word I used in my video before I saw this, before I was reading this. Authentic. Outside of male-defined terms like slut. Now, male-defined terms, I'm more comfortable with saying patriarchy-defined terms, because male-defined can be man-bashing, right? Do you see what I'm saying? How some people get offended by the term patriarchy, but the thing is that we're all oppressed by patriarchy, and women are included in that. So, and women do perpetuate and participate, even if it was originally male defined. And we're probably looking back at something that was church defined, if you want to know. Well, probably we are, aren't we? Okay, so that's why when she says male defined, I think it's much less contentious and actually completely more accurate to say patriarchy. Okay. The recent tube crush phenomenon, where young women take pictures of men they find attractive on the London Tube and post them on a website, illustrates how easily women copy dominant societal norms of sexual objectification rather than exploring something new and creative. And it's telling that while these pictures are themselves innocent and largely free of sexual innuendo, one can only imagine the sexually aggressive language that would accompany a site dedicated to secret photos of women. While the organizers of the slut blog might think that proudly calling themselves sluts is a way to empower women, they are in fact making life harder for girls who are trying to navigate their way through the tricky terrain of adolescence. Women need to take to the streets, but not for the right to be called slut. Women should be fighting for liberation from culturally imposed myths about their sexuality that encourage gendered violence. Our daughters and our sons have the right to live in a world that celebrates equally women's sexual freedom and bodily integrity. Now, iamcuriousblue, I'll put his comment, I'll just take a snapshot of it and I'll stick it up here on Camtasia. His comment about this article is like, what article did you just read? You know, and then the comments here are just utterly ridiculous. I'll read some of the comments down under the article, but what time are we at here? Ooh, we're at 13 minutes. Darn it. So let's talk about the slut concept, though. If we discuss these concepts of slut and virginity, it's a lot more useful than trying to banter around with a word, okay? But for this particular walk, I think it was appropriate that they used that word, okay? I do. But discussion of the concepts are going to help the adolescents, which Gail described as the ones being, you know, in the most turmoil here. Because discussion of slut is going to make people realize, how in the world are you going to define that? What does that mean? Somebody define it. And I say that a lot in comment sections too. Like, there's no such thing as slut. What does that mean? Define it for me. Define it. I demand it. And so that's how we're going to make progress. Not so much worrying about if we use the word or not. Or even on the other side of it, people thinking that using the word has some kind of magical properties too. It doesn't. And don't you just love Varia Blast's contribution to our consciousness at this point, where we're realizing that, wait a minute, yeah, this can happen, language is fluid, but that, I mean, he really made us break it down to ourselves, I think, about what you can do with words and what you can't or shouldn't. So, look, I think that, oh darn, I'm over time. My conclusion is definitely that between pro and anti, we've got patriarchy discussions that can be had, you know, definitely. And iamcuriousblue, this article says nothing that you said it did. So people, when you're reading his comments, will just take his word for it. But the cool thing about him is he'll give you a reference. So you can look it up. And I've enjoyed looking up his references. I've gotten some really good information from him. So I appreciate that. Sorry, babe, you lose on this one. If you have another link, though, sweetheart, you can post it for me, because this might not be the article you were actually thinking of. This is what you told me to Google, but maybe this isn't the article that you were looking at. Alright, thanks.